I'd like to kick off with our first session, without any further ado, from the director and founder, Lou Kiwanuka. Lou is not only the founder of the Shaper Group, with multiple years of experience in the industry, but she's also the vice chair of ESSA, and as of this week, the chair of the Events Industry Alliance. There is no one better, I can think, to be walking us through such vital information and kicking off our day. So also I'd like to point out that Lou is in Olympia, which is very exciting, from our venue to yours, Lou. Over to you.
Thank you. And yes, it is absolutely exciting. I'm here in the meeting room, just off the Grand Hall of Olympia, with lots of construction going on around me. So it's great to be on site in a real venue. So hi, I'm Lou Kiwanuka. Katie's kindly done the biog bit. And the reason that I'm talking to you about the Guide to the Guidelands today is that I was one of the many people that was working across the associations to put the guidance together and get it through the hoops that would have enabled us to go for an October live date if we'd have managed to get that far. So we obviously don't have a date set in stone as yet, but so I've brought a lot of the pillars to run through with you, because regardless of what the end product ends up being, these are the things that you're going to need to take on board. So first of all, we'll be covering the backstory. We'll be covering the basis of what's called the All Secure document, running through the 4 key areas of running an event safely, what the options are, so what's different for each event or what things we can draw on, how and who do we need to communicate with, and then the surprises. So just going through the backstory, and I'll keep this bit brief because it's good for context. So Clarion, Informer and Reed got together at the beginning and almost fast-tracked a bunch of the guidance. They outlined a 4-pronged approach, which we'll be going through in a minute. In addition to that, the EIA had a recovery group that was organisers, venues and contractors all joining forces and bashing out all the things that we possibly need to think about. There's also a plethora of cross-association and individual association working groups that have sat behind this guidance, so it's really well thought about. And in terms of the government, we passed our pilot, first time, no amends, totally tick box approach. It was important, bearing in mind we work in events, that we had a risk-assessed approach. We all know that everything we do is so different, going from project to project, show to show, organiser to organiser, venue to venue. So it's really important that we had an approach that was adaptable and wasn't going to hamstring us from the get-go. So our approach included this all-secure document, which I'll talk about in just a second. It included some key measures, which were kind of the very minimum measures you need to do to get your event open. It gave some examples, and it also gave some further guidance for exhibitors. So the basis of the All Secure document, there's 4 pillars: social distancing, cleaning and hygiene, protect and detect, and communication. I don't think that any of those will be a big surprise to you in the world that we're living in now. So just running through the kind of top line elements of what each of those mean in terms of reality on the day. With social distancing, this is the one that flagged straight away, and I'm sure got you all diving into calculations about density and how many people came through at what time in previous years. But it's in there as 2 meters or 1 meter with mitigation, and mitigation would generally mean something like a mask or some other form of barrier to prevent you being that close to somebody. Registration needs to be tackled within social distancing. We were looking at the kind of key grouping areas, the hotspots where people would naturally come together, and registration is the biggest factor in that. So ideas were coming out around things like staggered admissions, the flow management, how you move people through, what their natural flow is versus what constrained flow is, so how you can direct behaviour, the arrival, the final mile, the whole reason why we didn't go live in October, well, one of the biggest reasons is that we are unable to control the distance from which people come to an event. So all the while that where the government is approaching this kind of regional lockdown system, events fly in the face of that. So it's not necessarily about us not being able to open events safely. It's about the fact that if you're going to go to a bar or a restaurant, you'll probably go 10 miles, 20 miles, 30 miles. You're probably not going to go 100 miles. But for an event, you might go 100 miles, and that is what makes the difference. So the kind of arrival, the travel, where people are coming from, the demographics, the geographics of it are all part of that social distancing element. Human behaviour in social distancing is massive, and I'll be talking to you about some experiences that I had at the pilot towards the end of this presentation, because that's particularly relevant for you as marketers. The social functions, kind of the kind of scripts that we have as people, the social interactions of hugging, shaking hands, what's right for one, what's not right for another, and how we develop those in an event under the social distancing pillar. The second one is cleaning and hygiene, and it can be of no surprise to you whatsoever. But the complexity in that is quite an operational one, but it's also a visible one. It's also a messaging one about how clean something is, the confidence in which people have about the cleanliness of the environment that they are walking into. And then, so with that comes obviously stand cleaning, as well as touch point cleaning, waste management, the ambient environmental controls of the venue are also important. Protect and detect. Well, this kind of got sorted with track and trace, and out of all the sectors, we've already had this covered. We could pretty much tick this from the get-go on a business event. But certainly in terms of the detecting and the protecting, things like PPE, the levels of PPE, how we handle issues on site, so emergency response plans, all those kind of elements, and working with the local authorities. And finally, communication, and this really is your bag, and this is where you're, I think, and I hope to see the biggest shift between how the various functions within an organisation work together, because operations and marketing need to come together on this communication piece hugely. I've listed them there, but no doubt you've got all of those on your list anyway. But one of the things you might not have on your list, which we'll be talking about, is contractors. No longer do we need to just market to exhibitors and to attendees or delegates or visitors. We now also need to market actively to contractors, which is something that we haven't done before. Operations have marketed to them, but we need your help. That's my opinion anyway. So going back to what I was saying before about the various options that we had, what we did was put together some absolute bare minimums. So an event cannot open unless you have this in place. And what that idea was about was making it less onerous and so more adaptable for every individual show team to adapt their approach, to think innovatively, and like I said before, not to be hamstrung on specific fine details. So it was more like a show has to have a plan for this. So that might be a show has to have a plan for their access and egress in light of COVID. It doesn't say how you have to do that. And then we'd put in the middle column, which would be kind of the ideas, the options, would be you could think about staggered admission. You could think about, a split day. You could think about sectioning off parts of the event for certain things, but it was optional. And that document's an open source document, so you can go in and see that on the AEO website. The show dependent measures are so critical because in all of this, we need to still have an event at the end of it that somebody wants to go to, that is reflective of what they expect to see there. There are some extreme measures in there as well. So, ops, we love to kind of go into crisis mode before it's ever happened. So there were a few things in there that were, would have hamstrung us, but they're still worth considering. So things like, putting PA announcements out, and, hazard taping everywhere, and more extreme measures that we might not want to consider as our first point of call. And the other good thing about the approach that we had was that we had lots of examples from other sectors. So, and that's kind of the nuts and bolts. Now on to the bits that, as an operations professional, I would love you to come away from this with at least some ideas of how you could take this forward. So how and who do we need to communicate? You guys are the experts in influencing behaviour. And one of the key areas of concern in getting events up and running again is the contractor focus. It's going to be really hard to reach in communication, hundreds of different companies, often through a subcontractor supply chain, to influence their behaviour to build and break down our events safely. And so if we're looking at what we need to do differently to we've ever done before, personally, operations wise, I would like marketing to come into the ops sphere, understand what we're trying to communicate, and help us do that a bit better than we're doing already. We, as traditional kind of ops beasts, we love the word would and should and could and can't and all those kind of things, and that language I think is going to have to change. And we're going to need help doing that because it's kind of entrenched in our psyche. One of the areas we need to communicate a lot more effectively with is our exhibitors, to help them understand a new approach to stand design and their approach to exhibiting. A lot of our exhibitors will have lost a lot of the things that they normally gravitate to, like giveaways and touch screens and all the things that exhibitors are bringing their stands and products to life. A lot of them need a rethink. A touch screen is not a safe place anymore. It doesn't mean it's impossible. It just means that the exhibitor is probably going to have to stand next to that touch screen and do the touching for them, rather than the visitors doing it individually and it becoming a risk issue. Alternatively, it could mean that they just need to put in a really good cleaning regime, that the visitors feel comfortable that that regime is in place and it is okay to touch. But we do need to factor in human behaviour. People are avoiding touch points right now anyway. So whether an exhibitor puts in place countermeasures, the visitor needs to be 100% confident with that countermeasure as an approach. We are also going to have to do a number of things with the exhibitors in terms of their exhibit space, about flow and the management of our attendees and our visitors on their space itself. And that communication needs your support as marketers to ensure that we're not scaring our exhibitors away, that we're finding ways to innovatively engage with them, to make it as positive an experience as possible. And the pre-event experience for visitors is huge now. And I have to admit, I'm probably a marketer's worst nightmare. I hit unsubscribe so quickly, it's ridiculous. So it's very hard to get through to me. And from my personal experience, going to the pilot, which was at BDC a couple of months ago, strangely, I found myself craving communication from the marketing team, which was a massive shock to me, huge, because, like I say, I would normally just dismiss communications that are coming out about, like through a marketing channel. it got to the opening morning, the first morning of the pilot, and I was sitting there going, oh, I haven't had anything. I didn't have anything yesterday. Did I have anything yesterday? I don't know what to do about parking. I don't know. Where am I? And so, yeah, I found it really odd and very noticeable that I was missing that comfort that I somehow had decided I needed. The final mile approach of the event experience for the visitor and also the exhibitor and the contractor is also huge. Now, the final mile, the local authority will call it the X, or there's a number of different ways people will talk about it. But it's that kind of entry point. It's basically coming off the train, off the tube, off the bus, parking your car, and that final approach into the space. And I cannot wait for you guys to start coming up with some innovative communicating tools for that space that makes it a pleasure to be in, a welcoming experience. In addition, that obviously then goes to the doors themselves. And one thing Katie and I have been talking about quite a lot is that welcome experience. If we get this wrong, there could be a massive disconnect between the communications that you've fed through pre-event to their experience at the door and how they're greeted and how safe they feel in the environment that they're coming into, how seamless that transition is. So the entry experience is going to require operations and marketing to unify in a way that we've not probably unified to date on. So the surprises, I mentioned my surprise at being wanting to be communicated with on a more excessive level, and that is around safety, but it's also about logistics. The world has changed hugely over the last however long it's been, 8 months. Everything has changed. It's not just events, obviously, everything in our day-to-day life. So things that people would normally, you'd expect them to have either their own brain about it or have gone and done their own research. I do think in terms of event marketers, we need to go back to basics and re-walk every route and work out all the questions again and tell them what's different. So I turned up at a car park at the pilot and I couldn't get in. I hadn't realised that I'd have had to pre-book a lot earlier. I mean, and I'm generally quite an organised person, but I just didn't think that element would have changed, but it had. So there's going to be a lot of requirement to repackage that route and think of all the things that you'd normally just stick on a find us or how to get there website page. That needs pulling off, rewalking, and I'd suggest that the show teams walk that route individually and collectively to brain bash all the things that have changed in that. In terms of on the day, that kind of continuous and not continuous, nobody needs an email every 5 minutes, but regular communication to encourage that feeling of safety. And it is a lot about feelings, but also that it needs to meet the expectations on site. So if we're communicating, that communicating can be nothing of a ham-up element at all. That it must be absolutely accurate. So I'll give you an example. We've run one show this year, back in March, and we'd highlighted hand washing and sanitizers and everything. I mean, the venue boiler went on the blink, and the hot water wasn't as hot as it should have been. And one of our visitors was enraged because it did not meet her expectations. So not only do we need to make sure that if we're saying something that it does happen, the ops team need to make sure there's backup plans for when that doesn't happen to a greater degree. We also need to make sure we get control of the sales conversation as well. And in our marketing to the sales teams, make sure that to exhibitors, make sure that those expectations are also absolutely accurate. Our marketing to both visitors and to exhibitors can sometimes display us in our best light. And I think the hardest thing for you guys is going to be not doing that. We need to display ourselves at the point of reality, pure reality. Because if a visitor comes on site and the marketing is slightly off key, we will lose them forever. Because people will not tolerate a issue with their personal safety. And the pandemic has brought that into a real crunch point that we need to be aware of. So more than ever, we need our marketing, our sales and our ops teams totally united on what's being said, how it's being said, and what the reality of that is, and make sure that what we deliver is more than what we tell them they're going to get. That welcome experience is all part of that feeling that people are coming into an environment that is safe, and how we do that, whether that's kind of hygiene showmakers. You guys are going to be critical in figuring out some innovative ways to make that a positive thing. And then I think another key area where you are going to have a key a job to play is in the kind of how we manage and monitor our control methods on site. You know, ops, and sometimes we can be a little job's worth, and sometimes our staffing teams on site can be a bit job's worth, because you're briefing 100 people to basically follow a plan, and if a visitor or an exhibitor goes off that plan, sometimes they can not be overly personal in correcting that. We're going to again have to work really closely together on how we monitor and manage those kind of hotspots where people gather, which is probably the opposite of what you want, because every marketer wants a photo of a packed gangway. And from this point forward, that if we see a packed gangway, it would be the worst thing ever. So a definite mindset shift and a different approach to human behaviour. So, in summary, you guys have got a unique role to play now. You are key in re-understanding our audiences and our audience behaviour. I think the hardest thing for business events, particularly the indoor market, is that we've not had much of a trial run at this. We haven't yet understood the human dynamics of what we're going to be going into in the spring. And the problem that we have there is that the world has had practice at being by the time we'll run shows, and their expectations of us will be pretty high, and yet we've got no way to test things out. What I found from the pilot was extraordinary. The lessons that I learnt there were huge. I learnt that it's very difficult to communicate in a business event with a mask on. I learnt that it's really difficult to communicate to someone with a mask on at a business event who's also had Botox, because there's no reading that face whatsoever. We need to understand a lot of these things. We need to understand that people will want to, need to, desire to go to a cafe on the show floor so they can take their mask off, more than they want the cup of coffee. They just want the cup of coffee to enable them to take the mask off. I also learned that seating areas on the show floor are great for people that do want to sit and have a meeting for, but we need to look at our guests' behaviour. What we found at the pilot was that the seating areas were not used, but people were still standing in gangways and talking. And when you start to unpick that human behaviour, you start looking at, of course, they don't want to sit down, because then they have to extract themselves out of that situation. Events are brilliant for that kind of, oh, I've just seen someone, I'm just going to nip over there, that kind of quick extraction out of a social situation. We need to be in restaurants, we need to be out in the world and seeing what we think is going to transpire into a business event on the show floor. And I think I've read it right, but I think the next speaker is going to be all over that. So I'll leave it at that for human behaviour. The final thing is that this is a call out from operations to marketing. We need you. We are rubbish at communicating in a friendly manner. We are rules, we're order, we're everything that somebody doesn't then want to do because we said it the wrong way. So we need you to start inputting into operational messages, not just for our exhibitors, not just for our visitors, but our contractors as well. And I hope that that will take us into a better place than we've been before in our industry anyway. So that's it for me.
Thank you so much, Lou. I've written so many notes. I have some questions, if that's okay. You've got a bit of time. I was really interested in your experience as a visitor to the pilot. How, in your anxiety for having more and more communications as a visitor in the new world, what do you think is the best channel for that? Is it email? Is it text message? Is it WhatsApp? What do you think as a visitor was the best channel for you?
I think it's all of them, which is probably not what you want to hear. But actually, we all do communicate in such different ways. I have an aversion to a business channel messaging me on WhatsApp. But judging from the amount of business WhatsApps I now get, apparently that is okay. And there are people that do enjoy that. So, I mean, we've got all these communications. Maybe it's more a case of we ask them how they would like to be communicated with, and then direct our focus on big data's got to be good for something, right?
Yeah.
We should be able to map that out. So, yeah. So, if one prefers email, surely email should go there. But yeah, if there's any marketers who plan to WhatsApp me, don't bother.
You mentioned about communicating with the contractors, which obviously is something that marketers just don't normally do. I'm very aware that a lot of contractors for a lot of the big shows often bring in additional subcontractors. Where does the responsibility lie there to make sure that the subcontractors and the contractors are towing the line and bought into the guidance and doing their part?
So I think responsibility is probably the wrong word, because if we were going with the nuts and bolts of responsibility, there is a clear chain. It's the contractor's responsibility to communicate to the subcontractor. However, if we're talking about duty of care, I think that's probably the better approach. So do I have a duty of care to ensure that the subcontractor chain know what I want them to know? Yes, absolutely. And therefore, I don't think we can extract ourselves out of that kind of responsibility.
Brilliant. And can I ask what event technology, or if any event technology, you use for the pilot? Was there anything on the show floor that stood out to you? Anything that you think, not necessarily any companies directly, but any type of event technology that you think is really helpful?
So the pilot wasn't really about that. I think it was like more of a tick box event in terms of, right, walk through this, come out the other end, and DCMS will hopefully give us the green tick. But I do think event technology for when we go live will be so important on a much different level. I think as much pre-show, events going forward are going to need to be pre-planned a lot more effectively than they have been. And I think that joined up tech approach, again, combining marketing, operations and sales into one piece of tech would be incredible for simplifying things. I think at the moment, tech almost keeps us apart. Marketing have got their tech, sales have got their tech, and ops have got Excel. I mean, when those join up, I think we'll be in a beautiful place.
Yes, yeah. In fact, actually, it was we had to really rethink when we were talking about the physical event, and every time we kept coming up with registration solutions. I think it was Tabitha and your team saying, yeah, they can't touch a screen, and they can't pick, you can't hand them the badge. They've got to pick up their own badge, and it was just completely rethinking that process.
Yeah. I mean, I think the Chinese have got it right. I mean, they do photo recognition badging. So there's turnstiles. You walk up, it reads your face, and it lets you through. Yeah, we kind of need to get there really quickly.
Yeah, acceleration and adoption of that technology. And I was really interested because in marketing we rely so much on the fear of missing out, and thousands of people were attending the event. Do you think, but you mentioned obviously there's limited access to aisle space. If you were directing a large-scale event, what would you suggest would be the preferred method? Would you do half days, people staggered entry, limited entry? I know it's a bit tricky question to ask, really depends on the event, but what do you think in terms of people coming back to events? What would they see? Would they be put off by maybe perhaps thousands of people at a registration area?
Yeah, I think, and this is where it's really hard because we don't know, do we? We're kind of guessing at this over the next 6 months. So I'll probably watch this back, a year from now and go, what are you talking about? But if I were to bet on it, I would suggest that things that people won't like are queuing, unless it's separated and well managed, gangways that are crowded. I think smaller gangways will ultimately affect the exhibitors that are on that small gangway to quite a negative and detrimental effect. So we've kind of said to a lot of our clients, we need to be looking at least 3, if kind of not 4 meters, because those exhibitors will just not get people going down it if it's too tight. If it's too contained. I think theatres are also going to be affected in terms of an enclosed space. It's not necessarily about it being enclosed, it's just the format that somebody doesn't feel like they're able to extract themselves out of in a socially polite way. So we're certainly looking at different options in terms of how we do that and how we bring content across the show floor instead of in one place. Doesn't mean you can't have a focal point, but we're definitely coming up with some quite good and innovative ideas at this end about how we can take that content broader.
And Lou, I understand that you've got a download, that you've got more information on the guidance that people can access and download. And could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So we've done a little video which is called A Guide to the Guidance, and it's a broader, a deeper version of what we've kind of just gone through here. And it's got a bunch of documents. It's got the key measures I talked about, the All Secure standards in there. And afterwards, Katie, I'll give you a code for anybody who's joined up, so you can get into that for free. You just go onto the site, click and play, and then watch me talking about it again.
Thanks. And we'll share that link as well with everybody after this session. So brilliant. Thank you, Lou. I've got some great takeaways here. My 4 takeaways from this session are we need to communicate with every stakeholder, including contractors, before and after the event. Ops and marketing are going to need to work together much earlier in the event cycle. We're going to need to rethink touch screens and exhibitor stands and help them through that process. And there's no such thing as ever over-communicating in the final mile. I'm sure there's much more that I've missed as well. But thank you so much, Lou. I really, really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Laura, one of the founders at Tag Digital. Tag Digital is a PPC agency for event organisers. Our remit is to deliver visitor registrations, exhibitor leads, delegates, awards and new data for event organisers. We work in campaigns all over the world for organisers like Informa, Messe Frankfurt, Dubai World Trade Centre, Essential, ITE and lots more.